But first, before we get to the panel, I want to sit down with the man of the hour, Tobias Sturesson, co-founder of Heart Management and the author of You Can Culture, to understand why he wrote this book, why now, and how he hopes it will make an impact. So with that said, welcome, Tobias.
Thank you so much, Andreas. It's so great to be here and so excited about this morning together.
How are you today? It's a big day.
It's a big day. I'm excited. I'm relieved. I'm stressed. Everything on this global launch day today. But it's very, very exciting.
All the emotions, as it should be. Yes. Yeah, so great to be here with you and to start off this webinar with just asking you a couple of questions about the book. And I would like to start off at the point where I guess everyone who knows you, even just quickly realizes that you are deeply passionate about healthy culture and organizational cultures. What's behind that passion for you?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and I think a lot of that passion really comes back to something that I experienced, and I grew up in a Christian community that over time really turned into this religious cult and very toxic environment and where people were singled out and treated as toxic and my mom, who was a leader in that environment, ultimately became one of them, and she was isolated, demonized, and ultimately she several times tried to take her own life to escape the terror and the trauma. And I grew up in that community. I became a part of that very unhealthy culture, and I became complicit in the behaviors, even as it tore our family apart. And I've really had to wrestle with the questions of how could an organization that it seemed to be driven by a noble mission turn into something so toxic? And how could I, who saw myself as an ethical and values-driven person and leader, become complicit in psychological abuse? And of course, it would be great if that question was just mine and just my story. And of course, my story is extreme, but the reality is, and I think most people here in this conversation today realize that we see elements of unhealthy culture in organizations all around us. We see it in companies, we see it in public organizations, we even see it in NGOs. And we see these elements of things that are hindering the organization from delivering on its mission, that are creating an environment where people cannot thrive, but instead sometimes they're abused or just in a very dysfunctional environment, and where the impact of the organization ultimately turns into something negative instead of the positive impact that it should have. So that's really been a key driver behind the reason that I wrote this book.
Yeah, and I can totally understand that, and thank you for sharing your background and sharing your story, because I understand that becomes a real motivator as you're describing it for working with these things. I mean, there are countless books on culture and leadership, and you have dedicated thousands of hours over the past years writing, researching, and working on this book. And I mean, you talked a bit about the motivation behind it, of course, but why did you decide to write this book, and why do you think that this book is so important?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think over 7 years writing a book, you write many books, and there's been many different iterations of this book. What has really been the driver for me is seeing so many leaders that are struggling to know, how do we impact our culture? How do we change our culture? How do we transform perhaps elements of our culture? And talking to HR and ethics and compliance leaders who want to see change in their organization, but they struggle with the how. And when we talk about culture, it's something that can feel very fussy, very hard to really know what to do. And what I felt is that I could offer up my personal journey to show that, okay, I'm not standing from a place of judging anyone. I'm standing from a place of vulnerably sharing my failures and also seeing how other organizations can end up in issues as well. But then also taking the journey that I've taken over the last several years, working with so many leaders, so many organizations on culture change, and also having had the opportunity to have conversations with and interview so many researchers and experts in many countries around the world on how to really impact culture, and then distilling that into something that can become actionable, that is something that leaders can actually take and make a difference, both I think in terms of growing their self-awareness, but then also taking tactical changes and implementing habits and practices that are really key to not only, achieving this short-term change, but actually to sustain a lasting change.
Yeah, and that is something that I personally really appreciate about the book, that it isn't fussy, because a couple of years ago when I didn't work at Heart Management, I used to think that culture was fussy too. But it's practical, it's actionable, it's you really distilled it down to something that you can understand and really take action on. And that is something I personally really appreciate with it. But who do you think will benefit the most from this book?
Yeah, so I mean, I've already mentioned that I think every leader will benefit from it. I think, of course, that there's nuances that are especially, I think, helpful for leaders in larger and perhaps multinational environments. But I think it's relevant for every leader, whether you're a senior executive or you're a line manager. And I think it's also really a great resource. And I've been so encouraged to hear from several ethics and compliance and HR leaders who are seeing this and who have read early copies of the book and have felt that this is a perfect resource to put in the hands of the leaders in their organization to help them take ownership of culture instead of thinking that this is something they should just delegate to someone else.
Yeah. I mean, the book is released today, and it's already been ordered by leaders in over 80 countries, which is amazing, I think. But if you should say something more about, I mean, you mentioned some things, but just what do you hope readers will take away from it, and what change do you hope that it will lead to? If you would like to expand a bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, so as we say at Heart Management, we have this vision of a world free from destructive culture. I know what a destructive culture feels like, and I've had so many conversations with people who have shared their stories. But of course, in many cases, it doesn't need to be that extreme. But still, if this book can come into the hands of leaders who really see that need for change, who are looking for a guide, who are looking for a help, who are looking for a plan to really make a change, to not just do something on the surface, but to really do the deep work, both in themselves, but also in their culture and their organization. If it can be a help to them, I'm incredibly grateful, and it will be worth all the time spent writing this book.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, thank you for that, and thank you for answering those questions, Tobias. But I'm going to hand it over to you now to take us further into the panel discussion with the great panel that we have with us today. So please take it away.
Thank you so much, Andreas. And I'm just getting up the right document here. But so I am incredibly thrilled to have an incredible panel with us today. 3 people, and I'm going to introduce them shortly, that have meant a lot to me and meant a lot to this journey. And I know that they have so much to give us today in this conversation. The first one is Guido Palazzo, who's a professor of business ethics at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland. Guido is someone that I got connected to, I think, in 2021, who's since then been this incredible source of inspiration for me on thinking about ethics and culture, and why good people do bad things. An incredibly generous person that I had the privilege of meeting in Lausanne a few weeks ago and spending some time with in person, which is also always really nice. The second person is Michaela Ahlberg. Michaela and we got connected in 2020, and I interviewed her and her colleague for our podcast, and we did a webinar together. And then Michaela reached out to me as they were at her company at the time, Getinge. They were creating this global responsible leadership program, and I got the incredible privilege of working with Michaela over 1 or 2 years to develop this program, and I've learned so incredibly much from her and from her experience. And she's also co-authored a book called The Gray Zone, which I can really, really recommend. And should say as well that Guido has a book coming out soon, and that if you go to his LinkedIn page and so on, you can find information about that. And the third person today is Erica Wikman, who's the Vice President Compliance and Corporate Integrity at Autoliv. And Erica and we haven't had as much time together, but we've had the opportunity to meet, and she's really incredibly inspirational and someone with a very extensive experience of building a culture of speaking up in organizations, which is something that she is super passionate about. So I'm incredibly glad to be joined by all three of you, and we want to try to create a conversation here together that it's not just, three monologues, but that we can actually talk and build on each other's perspectives, or that you can build on each other's perspectives. And so I'm going to throw out questions, and I'm going to allow anyone who wants to begin, and then the rest to just build on or question whatever that other person said. We had a little bit of some disagreement yesterday in our first event which was fantastic. But before we jump into those questions, I just wanted to throw out a question where I would love to hear all of your perspectives first, and that is, why do you think that cultural health matters?
Well, shall I go then?
Go, Michaela.
Hi, Erica. Hi, Guido. Good to see you. Well, it matters a lot, of course, because that's the underlying force of all the decisions and actions we take as professionals. So, many wise people, much wiser than I, have pointed out that is really what is the most valuable thing in a company, that drives it forwards and pushes it towards the goal. And if the culture is toxic or bad in different ways, it will affect everything in the company. It will affect the profitability, it will affect who you can employ, it will affect everything that you do in the organization. So of course it's really important, but it's also very elusive. So it's also very difficult to really understand and work with.
Thank you, Michaela. And then Michaela, just say we cannot see you, or at least I cannot see you. So
I can see myself, and I have the camera on.
And I don't know if you want to try to just jump out and jump back in again, and we can see if that helps. Otherwise, we'll just go with your voice.
Okay, I'll try again. But yeah, I can see myself, which is not the most wonderful thing. But I will leave and come back.
Thank you, Michaela.
Okay. While Michaela is sorting that out, I can just echo what she said. Actually, I think the cultural health of an organization is the enabler of all of what Michaela mentioned. But one thing that I think is becoming more and more important for us companies, big companies that want to be progressive, and in our case, develop life-saving solutions. We need the best talent, and right now in the world, the best talent care a lot about the corporate culture, because the the company culture is like the mental and physical health of a person. That's how important it is. Without that mental, physical health or cultural health in the organization, we can't progress with what we want to do. So it's absolutely essential. And it doesn't come for free.
No, it doesn't. Thank you. Guido.
Yes, now Michaela, we can see you. It worked. So good.
Wonderful.
As you know, Tobias, I come more from the dark side, while you work on the bright side. And I have this sentence that I often use when I work with a company, when I do a meeting with a supervisory board or an executive team. And my first sentence is very often, I'm only here because you paid 1 billion, or I'm only here because you paid 2 billion or 3 billion. I think culture is a bit like breathing in, breathing out during COVID, right? So we never think about breathing, but suddenly we have this virus and breathing becomes something essential and we become mindful about it. The same with culture. We normally do not think much about it when it works well and smoothly, but once it is destroyed, we see it missing. And that can be very expensive for companies.
Yeah, and I think to connect to what you just said, Guido, and I think that's a really, really great starting point, that in my book, You Can Culture, I really explore the dangers of assuming that one's culture is healthy, or blaming bad apples, or treating culture as this project, which companies often do. And a question that I have, and that I think is so important for our audience here, and this conversation will be on our podcast and so on as well. So it's going to reach a lot of ethics and compliance and HR leaders and other executives. And I think it's that companies are so often slow to acknowledge that there are issues, that we don't see them, which then leads to, as you said, companies paying billions, or a lot of people connected to what you said, Erica, leaving the company. So what do you think it is that keeps leaders blind and paralyzed, and kind of keeps us from addressing the issues and seeing them early on?
Shall I start this time?
Yeah.
Please start.
Okay, I think there are two mistakes we make when we look at bad behavior in an organization, or the absence of culture. The first thing is that when we see something bad happening, we attribute it to character. We assume it's a bad person doing it. And the second mistake we make is that we, by and large, are convinced we are good people. Think about what Martin Winterkorn, the former CEO of Volkswagen, said when he was speaking in the German Bundestag after the Dieselgate scandal. He said, "I always had an open door." So he thought of himself as a leader that was approachable, while in reality he was creating a terror regime, so that even newspapers would call Volkswagen's culture a kind of terror camp. So everyone, even the most toxic people, probably think they are good people. Maybe a bit rough, but that's how the world is. And we think about others as problematic, and try to explain if something goes wrong via a few people, the bad apples. And it's also an easy way out, because then you can stop the investigation, stop the soul searching, because you solved the problem. You kicked out the guy who did it.
100% agree. And you try to find the culprit, or somebody you can blame, or you can fire somebody, and you show that you are taking action, but you're not really addressing the core problem. You're just addressing kind of the surface. And I also think, I always agree with Guido, but I also think that companies and organizations spend so little time trying to figure out the culture, and spending time in understanding what do we need to do to create the culture that we want to have. If it is the culture of integrity or innovation or whatever it is that are the lead words. So I think that the work with creating and building and strengthening a culture is like a never-ending journey that has to go on all the time. And people at the top are very action-oriented, and they want quick fixes, and they're very focused on other things.
Yeah, I can only agree, but I also think that many companies or many leaders at the top may sometimes be slow to sort of realize that we have a problem or a culture issue. And I think that in big companies, I work for a company with 70,000 employees, and we don't have one culture.
No.
In big companies, cultures differ. We may have one culture in our head office and one culture in our production site in Mexico or technical center in Bangalore, whatever. And I think, we talk about tone from the top, but I also think it's important that we have awareness at the top, that we know, yes, we set the tone, but what's the mood in the middle and what's the buzz at the bottom? I think it's so important for senior leaders, senior management teams to actually make sure that they are well informed and they are aware of what happens out in the organization. Having a decentralized organization is good in many ways, but here I think leaders have to pay attention to what's going on in the whole organization, not just at the head office or at the company website.
And we know that they live in their own little optimism bubble at the top. So.
Yeah, and then I think as a compliance professional, I think part of our job is to point that out for them with data and with good research, with everything that we can do to actually help them understand. Because I don't think oftentimes that they are, I think they're well intended. And I do think that they, as you pointed out, really believe that everything's good here. We're a good company.
There's so much insight in what you're saying here that I think is so important. And just if someone else, and of course, Erica, you've already, I think, mentioned several things that organizations can do to kind of start to try to break that bubble, because I think just like you say, also we have the complexity that in large organizations there are, and organization doesn't have to be that super large for that to be true. There are many different cultures, and they might differ in different countries, different business units, different trades. Like there's so many different ways that might play out. But of course, with every organization, I think, or almost every organization that ended up in some kind of issues, whether on the first pages of the news or just internal issues, they thought that there wasn't any issues at first. I mean, they first lived with that assumption. And I've seen that even in organizations that have gone through these big scandals where I've come in and you realize that if they would have only listened to the early signals, they could have done things so differently if they would have had more of a humble approach, more what I really encourage leaders in the book to kind of have this approach to assume that there are vulnerabilities, assume that there are issues, and then ask the question, how do we find out what they are, instead of assuming that they aren't there. But what are other things that you think that leaders and organizations can do to avoid this type of blindness?
So when I listen to you now, Tobias, I have been reflecting recently quite a lot because I've been given some time to do that. And I believe we pay too much attention to the people at the top. I think we talk too much about the executive team and the boards. And I don't really see, after working in many big multinational companies, that's where we should spend most of our time. I really think it's important to recognize that when it comes to creating a culture, every person counts in the company, and to spend more time out in the organization, working with everybody, and not isolating your topics to the management team, who are anyway all the time thinking that they should fix everything. They may have 70,000 employees or 20,000 employees or whatever, but they still think that they should fix everything when they have all these people there. So I really think it's important when we talk about culture to recognize the whole body of people who works in an organization. And then I realized, of course, that to address and to approach and to work with all these people, you need buy-in, because you need the money or the program or the attention to do it. But that's kind of another thing.
And I think connected to what you're saying there, Michaela, that because I think that's something we really want to explore in this conversation today. So how do we do that? How do we engage and the organization in really practicing? Because I think it's also something that we can't, just hold a one-day workshop and then everyone learns to be more ethical or be more like it's something that we need to practice. And in my book, I really want to, as you say, Michaela, put the focus not just on saying that it's the tone from the top, but really it is everyone with influence in the organization that send signals that tell the organization or tell people what is encouraged, rewarded, not accepted, and that will shape the organization. And I think many times that happens on a team level. And so, But before that, I wanted to connect to another thing you were saying, which is the buy-in, because I know that we have a lot of HR executives and ethics and compliance executives and so on who are struggling with that question. And now we have this incredibly experienced panel here. So what would you say in terms of getting that buy-in? What do you think is critical?
Well, in my company, what we're trying to do when we work with communication or workshops or trainings, make the most out of the time that you're given. Because if you can really spend a lot of time creating good content, good training, including good storytelling, things that really matter to people. And don't be afraid of making it very personal. We can do training about our rules. Yes, we can. But what's more important, I think, and especially for leaders at all levels, is really to get personal. What does it mean for me? What does it mean for me when I make a decision under pressure? What is driving me as a human being? Point out those vulnerabilities in all humans and those weaknesses. And then I also think it is important to work together. You talk about compliance and ethics professionals and HR. Oftentimes I feel that I've worked in a few companies, and it takes a little bit of effort, but it's so worth it when you can combine the efforts. Make sure that the topics of ethics and integrity and compliance get folded into leadership training that typically is run by HR. I think it's so important to get in there. Don't let it run in parallel, and make sure to focus as much on the content of face-to-face interaction as you would spend on developing these necessary e-learnings that we all know that we have to have in place. But really take the time to create some engaging content and work together. Work together with the professors like Guido, for example. It's also a good tip to engage somebody from the outside that has a little bit of academic authority and good storytelling.
Thanks, Erica. An important point that you made is showing of vulnerabilities top down. I think this is the biggest misunderstanding top managers very often have. They think if they show vulnerabilities in terms of sharing an ethical dilemma, for instance, they are considered weak leaders. that people think they are not good leaders. But the opposite is true. The more they share also their views on the ethical dimension of their role, the more they're considered good leaders. But they very often also lack the vocabulary to do this, the training, the skills. That's why it is so important for them probably to read your book, to be honest, to get this vocabulary and to get this understanding. Maybe another point to the question you had, Tobias. There's one thing that I always find amazing. Most of the time when there is a scandal in an organization, it is never the top leaders who break the law. It is always people in the middle. And why do they do this? Well, they do this because they interpret what their leaders want them to do, right? So, and that is why the tone from the top is so important. And this is why the ethical conversation is so important, to avoid these misinterpretations, that it's not this business at any price that the top leaders want, but they want this within the limits of law and ethics. But the more pressure you make, the more ambiguous you hold the rules, the more this interpretation comes up that this is what I'm supposed to do, to win this sales at any price.
And here, Tobias, I would like to just, I was very happy to read some part of your books, but pointing out that get clear is one of the habits that you point out. And I think it's so important and often overlooked because we talk a lot about ethics, integrity, etc. But very seldom you hear a leader really explain, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for this company? Be very, very clear on that. And that helps and empowers the employees and leaders further down in the organization.
And I think when I listen to you and kind of the picture that I have and what I would like to inspire is really that, so in organizations that we create opportunities, and I think part of that is also creating opportunities for people to learn together, because I think that there's so much that they can learn from each other if they would just talk about their challenges, their dilemmas, their failures, and so on. And so many times we have not created those opportunities. The way, for example, we do that in our work is to create small, what we call growth groups or peer learning groups, where they have those conversations. But what I'm thinking, if we can get people across an organization to start more reflecting both personally and together about the challenges, the dilemmas, and then we have the opportunity for them also to then raise issues and tensions that they see. Oh, but we say that we should value this thing, but we feel that this is what is rewarded, so that those tensions actually reach the people who could do something about them. I know that is maybe a bit of an idealistic picture, but I'm thinking in terms of kind of creating that type of, which is not something you do in a workshop, but is something that is a continual work, as I think several of you have alluded to as well. What are your thoughts on how we best can make that happen? And I know, Michaela, that you, I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts here.
So I also like that one of the parts of your book is called Get Listening, maybe, because we don't listen. I mean, there is this new research that has come out from Lund University in the south of Sweden, close to where you live, which says that leaders, managers spend more than somewhere between 85 and 90% of the time speaking. So they have huge mouths, but very tiny ears. And that goes for me too. So it's not that I'm saying that I'm better than anybody else, but we really need to make an effort to listen and create a dialogue. If we don't create a dialogue, we will not understand what is going on in the organization, and nobody will feel that they are listened to, because actually they aren't listened to. So I think that's really, really important. But also, I think that one of the things that we don't understand in an organization, and Erica has alluded to this as well, is that we may understand the law, we may understand all our different processes and the rules and the policies that we have created, but we don't understand human beings. We don't understand ourselves. So we need to make that clear, to create a conversation about all these mechanisms that creates, as we started, not one person or two person or five people who are doing the wrong thing, but all of the other people who are enabling this behavior. I listen to all of these podcasts about bad culture, about scandals, about wrongdoing, and everywhere there has been hundreds of signals of people who have cooperated in this culture, in this way of working, because they don't, as Guido always says, they are good people, but they make bad choices because they are influenced by different human things that we have, defense mechanism, ethical blindness, whatever. And we don't understand that. We don't understand privilege. We don't understand, these basic points of biases because we don't talk about it. We are not educated. We are not trained in that. So that I think that is really important to bring that in, because otherwise you can talk about your core values, until the end of day. It will not happen.
You want to chime in, Guido, Erica?
Yeah, I think this is the key point. We tell people in organizations to speak up, and if you look into scandals, you see that speaking up is the big issue there, because there are people who speak up, and they're always fired or threatened or silenced in other ways. We tell people to speak up, but we forget to tell leaders to listen, and not just to tell. We forget that both speaking up and listening requires skills. So that requires training. You cannot just tell people to speak up and then you listen to them and you make all kind of mistakes, maybe against your best intentions. If you don't train people to speak up, if you don't train them to listen, it will never happen. Plus, you then also need to create this context in which they are protected if they do speak up, right? Is there an anti-retaliation program that helps them not just in the moment, but maybe over the next 2-3 years, because they might be exposed to subtle retaliation? Do I feel safe if I speak up? That's one question people will ask themselves. And the second is, will anyone listen anyway? Or yes, I feel safe to speak up, but it seems it doesn't matter if I do so. So these are the two big mistakes that companies make. Train people and set the examples from the top down.
Can I just add there a little bit of my own experience, or our experience in our company? As you mentioned, Tobias, I'm very passionate about the concept of speaking up, and speaking up as the wider concept of speaking up about everything, positive, negative, raising concerns, raising ideas, etc. I think it's so important to work building that culture. And we launched a Speak Up program a few years ago. And every year we have this employee survey where one of the questions is, do I feel safe to speak up? And we've had quite good results on that question for many years. It was sort of overall in the company green. But then one of my brilliant employees went in and dug a little bit deeper into the data. And she could conclude that, wait a minute, if we slice it not by department or division or whatever, if we slice it by management level, we could see that it was very green, senior leaders, sort of in the middle, and in fact, red with the non-managerial people. And that differed of course, depending on where you were in the world, but we could actually slice the employee survey in that way that we can then show that, hey, you might feel safe to speak up, but your people here don't. And that's on you. And after we got that, we sort of had this sort of mind the gap message where we shifted from conducting speak up training to everyone to conduct instead face-to-face listen up training for leaders to make sure that we close this gap. And then we talked about psychological safety and what you can do practical as a leader to create the sense of I feel safe to speak up. Of course, non-retaliation policies is very, very important. But if that's an answer that I give somebody that says, is it safe to speak up in this company? And I said, yes, because we have a non-retaliation company, then they're even more scared of speaking up, because why would you need a non-retaliation policy? So I think that you have to work with both the formal protections of actual whistleblowers, but also the more softer side of leadership that is actually possible to upskill and train. But you have to, like Guido said, you have to practice it.
Mm.
And I love what you're saying here, and I think what you're already saying, which is really the, I think, fundamental thought in my book, that these are things that we need to practice. They are practices and habits that a culture, just like our physical health, cultural health, is shaped by what we repeatedly do. So it's the repeated act of listening, of actively listening, and I think actively listening has so much to do with soliciting feedback, of designing your meetings in a way where you don't, as I think you said, Michaela, talk all the time, but where you actually create space for people to give input, or where, for example, if you present a strategy, you don't say, if you happen to have an issue with this, you can come and talk to me afterwards, but you say, what are your issues? What are your concerns? Let's take some time to write them down, and then we're going to go through them together. I mean, there are very tactical things that we can do, but I also think that they start from the perspective of humility, that without the practice of humility, which I also think is a practice, not just a character trait, but it's something we actively do, that without that we don't see the need to listen. We don't see the need to do all these other things, or to create a more psychologically safe environment. And I'm thinking, if you had a magic wand, and I wish you all did, but what is some practice that you just wish, this is something that you think that leaders, maybe at every level in an organization, should start doing, that you think would really make a big difference towards healthier cultures and organizations?
Before I go to the magic wand, can I just say one thing that I think is really important? Of course. That is that when we come together and talk about culture, a lot of the time we talk about wrongdoing and making sure that we create a company with less wrongdoing and more right doing and a culture of integrity. But it's important, I think, to understand, and coming back to Erica's point of cooperative work in an organization through the silos everywhere, that having a culture of psychological safety where people feel safe, where they feel welcomed who they are, where they can say things that are not maybe the most comfortable thing to say, where they can point out flaws, it is also really good for a culture of innovation, for a culture of creativity, for a culture of quality. So it really is such an important factor in everything we do when we talk about the culture. So I think that's really basic to build the platform of why is this even important. So then maybe I'll hand the magic wand over to Guido.
No, but I just want to confirm, Michaela, that I think that is such an important point. And I also think that if we would focus more, because I also think that for many leaders, if we start talking about compliance, that can feel like this, oh, I just, have to follow these rules. But when we talk about really being the kind of leader that you want to be, leaving the kind of legacy that you want to leave, and having the impact that you want to have, that's where I feel that a lot of leaders, they really connect with that. And where I also think that, as you say, psychological safety is such a key thing, because it impacts all the different aspects of ethics, of innovation, of quality, of all these things, as you talk about. So thank you for raising that. And now back to the magic wand.
Yeah, maybe if I continue with that, Tobias, you might remember the podcast we had a while ago, many years ago now, on where we talked about France Telecom and the suicide wave because of the toxic culture. Yeah. And that I mentioned there that the thing that I found most shocking in this scandal and in many other scandals is the silence of the colleagues, the bystander effect. I observe someone being bullied and I do nothing. I observe someone speaking up and I agree with that person, but the leader reacts aggressively, I remain silent. So if I would have and this reinforces this horrible cultures that we sometimes see. If I had that magic wand, what I would ask leaders to do is to fight against the bystander effect, to create a culture where not only people speak up for themselves, but where they speak up for each other. And we often forget this when we talk about speak up. It's not just about me. It's about, am I willing to say something if someone else had the courage to speak up? And then very often the fact that I don't do this has nothing to do with courage. It very often hangs together with me not being prepared. I don't know what to say. I agree, but I'm not spontaneous enough. So as you can train listening and speaking up, you can train people to be allies of each other. And that is what we need to do, I guess.
I think that's really, really important. And I also, coming back to this, that everybody matters. I think that it's important that they feel that they matter as well. To make sure that you create this environment where people feel empowered, where they feel that they matter, where they are not just waiting for somebody else to tell them what to do or say or plan, but really feel that they have a little platform at work. Everybody has a little platform. Some have bigger platforms and some smaller, but we all have a platform where we work.
So if I had a magic wand, and I could decide one practice that leaders in my company would start doing, it would actually be mandatory reflection after each interaction that they have, let's say in a leadership team, in a management team, where you make so many decisions on a regular basis. And we all know here that we have a lot of things other than far away from common sense that actually affects the way we make decisions. But to have that mandatory reflection after each meeting to say, did we act with our should self, or did we act with our want self, for example? What sort of affected us in this meeting? Did we listen to everybody's opinion? Did we include everyone in this decision? And also to make sure, and one other thing, do we here have conflicting values? Because I think that's very common, and we don't often talk about that you can have values in your company that's supposed to guide your decision making. But it's really important that you acknowledge the times where these values are conflicting with each other, that you can't really, and that's where we end up in a gray zone, right? It's not black or white. It has to be a balanced approach. And then also, speaking of speak up, make sure that we walk away from this meeting and silently disagrees on things. Have to make sure that we are patient enough to really let everybody get the chance to prepare, to actually voice their concerns, if any. I think a little bit more time spent on that type of reflection together could make a big difference, I think.
I think that
sorry, go on.
I think also that to if I had a magic wand, I would really like to create more competence and willingness to stay in the gray zone, because it's not only that people have different opinions and different values. It's also that we might have different stakeholders that we should take into consideration when we make a decision. And these may all be conflicting. So at the end, we are going to have to decide something, but we are going to have to try to live in this gray zone for a little bit, which we as human beings hate. We hate the friction, we hate the discomfort, we hate when everybody disagrees, and we take it personally, and it becomes difficult. But if we could learn to have these conversations, these difficult conversations, I think that the quality of decision making and actions taken in the company would greatly, it would be much, much, much higher quality.
Thank you so much for all those perspectives, and I think you connect so many important things together. And back to Erica, what you were saying about reflection in UCAN culture connected to each practice, I suggest actions, and the first action that I suggest that leaders take connected to the first practice of embracing vulnerability is to create a habit of reflection and really reflecting on the impact of our leadership. And then a bit later, I suggest the ritual of reflecting together as a team, because as you say, I think if we would do those things, and that connects back to things I've learned from you, Guido, as well. I remember asking you, what is the most important thing that leaders can do? And you like reflecting on our values, taking the time to reflect, how are we living that out, both as individuals, as teams. And I've seen organizations implement that, and it's become a really powerful practice. It takes some work. It doesn't often, it might fall flat the first time, but when you do it regularly, you're going to see that it makes a difference. And before we go into questions, I also would just wanted to connect back to what you were talking about, Guido, because I think that in one way summarizes part of what we've been talking about here today, and that is the aspect that this is personal, that ultimately who we are as human beings is very much shaped by how we also act in situations where our values are tested. And I used to say that values that are not allowed to cost us something aren't worth anything either. I've asked many groups of leaders to share examples of situations where they spoke up and how they overcame objections, rationalizations, and how it made them feel, and then reflect on on situations where they became silent and what hindered them from speaking up, and how it made them feel. And I've heard so many times people share, of course, stories from their professional lives, but also many times stories about a bully in school, and they stayed silent. And as you've been saying, I think if we as organizations can actually create opportunities for people to practice these things, to practice having the hard conversations, to practice living and standing up for our values, I think we can benefit tremendously as organizations, but also generally as people.
Thank you so much for that. And again, thank you to you, Guido, and Michaela, and Erica, and Tobias for this panel discussion. It was so interesting, and I'm super thankful that we had all of you with us today. So thank you for this part. And we're gonna move on now to just go into one final part. I want to show a short presentation for all of you before we end here today. And I'm just gonna make sure to... So many buttons to push.
While you're doing that, Andreas, I just also wanted to take the opportunity as well to just thank you, Michaela, Guido, and Erica. This was extremely valuable. Thank you for being so generous with your time, with your experience, with your insights. I'm honored that you would spend this time with us, and I think there was so much to learn from this conversation. So thank you so much from me as well.
So we promised a gift for all of the people who participated during these launch events, and this is what we would like to offer you, the You Can Culture, the journey. As transforming culture is not a short-term project, as we've heard today, it requires developing new leadership habits. While cultivating these habits takes time and effort, the sacrifice is well worth it. And to support your growth, we want to invite you to a 1-year journey through the transformative habits and practices in You Can Culture. And in this journey, you'll also get the opportunity to learn from and gain experience from other leaders who are taking the journey alongside you. So who is this journey for? It's mainly for executives, HR and ethics and compliance leaders in multinational companies and organizations. What does it entail? You will receive insights from Tobias in collaboration with renowned academics, experts and executives, just as we have done today, through quarterly digital events and that introduces each habit, and also a monthly podcast focused on each practice and some newsletters around that as well. And what is the cost? And this is the gift from us to you, that it's free of charge. All you need is to have a copy of the book so that you can follow along on this journey by yourself. And you can find all the information on the web link that we have there, heartmanagement.org/journey. And you also have the opportunity to sign up there. And I just want to mention the first event that we will host on November 12, where we will go through the habit Get Humble. Then we'll have the awesome privilege to have Richard Bystrong and Klaus Moosmeyer with us for that. So that is already up on the website, and there's a possibility to sign up for that now. But we'll send this information out to you in an email after this event, so you'll get everything there, together with a recording of today's conversation. But if you would want to take this transformative process to your organization, then the You Can Culture journey is brought to you by the Culture and Leadership Program, which is an impactful company-specific culture change and leadership transformation program by us at Heart Management. And this powerful program will equip your leaders to develop self-awareness, identify their blind spots, and begin to develop leadership habits while driving critical culture change. So this program spans over 12 to 18 months, where you focus on the habits and have a month where you work on each practice. And it includes individual reflection and leadership actions. So every month, the thought-provoking pre-recorded learning content comes out with videos to watch and reflection questions and actions to take for all the managers and leaders. There's also immersive workshops, quarterly workshops, designed to address organization-specific challenges and needs within the organization. We have growth groups, as Tobias talked about, which is smaller groups of 4 to 5 people meeting regularly for shared learning and mutual accountability with a set agenda. And this is something that we have seen had an immense impact on the organization and the leaders, to have that forum to sit down and do a lot of the reflecting that we were talking about and heard the panel talk about. And there's also team activation material included in this, where your managers will receive pre-recorded learning material to share with their team and do workshops together with them as part of this program. But there's more information about this program on our website. And as I said, we will send out an email to you with all the information. But even though I could sit here all day and talk about these questions and topics, our time is actually up now. So I would just want to take the opportunity now in the end to thank you all for being here today. Thank you for being a part of this. And again, thank you to the panel. And especially a thank you to you, Tobias, for doing the job and writing this book. I am a firm believer that honor should be where honor is due. And I think you've done a tremendous job. And I'm very thankful that this book is out now. And I'm expectant of what the impact of it will be. So wishing you all a fantastic day and hope to see you soon again. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.